I inherited responsibility for his seed, not just money.
I remember the afternoon the way you remember the moment before a car crash, slow and sharp at the same time. The envelope sat on my kitchen table, cream-colored and official, the kind lawyers use when they want you to take them seriously. My daughter Sophia had left it there an hour before, her keys still jangling in my memory as she'd backed toward the door. "Dad," she'd said, her voice small but certain, "don't get your hopes up. Mom left everything to the foundation. You won't see a dime." The words landed like a fist to the sternum. I stood there in my kitchen, 63 years old, and felt the floor tilt under me like I was standing on ice. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked twice. The refrigerator hummed. The envelope waited. I had built a life on steady things. My pension covered the mortgage on a two-bedroom ranch house with vinyl siding that needed replacing. My car was a 2014 sedan with a cracked taillight I kept meaning to fix. Every Sunday I mowed the lawn in diagonal stripes because it was the one thing I still did that looked deliberate. Elaine and I had divorced 12 years ago, not with screaming but with the quiet erosion of two people who'd stopped meaning the same things when they used the same words. She'd gone on to build an empire first in real estate, then in philanthropy. The Elaine Hartwell Foundation became her third child, the one that never disappointed her. Our actual daughter, Sophia, worked 70-hour weeks as a hospital administrator and called me every other Sunday out of duty more than affection. I didn't begrudge Elaine her success. I'd signed the divorce papers that gave her the investment portfolio and kept the house. I thought we were even. I thought we were done. The phone call came on a Tuesday. Sophia's voice was tight, the way it got when she was trying not to cry. "Dad, Mom's gone! Heart attack!" They found her at the office. I sat down hard in the kitchen chair. "When?" "This morning. The lawyer wants to see us Friday. About the will." Friday came too fast. I drove to the law office 20 minutes away, my hands damp on the steering wheel. Sophia was already there, sitting in the waiting room with her purse clutched in her lap like a shield. She didn't look at me when I sat down. The lawyer, Robert Henshaw, was a man I'd met twice before, once at our wedding, once at our divorce. He looked older now, his hair gone white at the temples, his mouth set in a line that suggested he'd delivered bad news so many times it no longer moved him. "Mr. Hartwell," he said, sliding a folder across the mahogany desk, "your ex-wife's will is straightforward. The entire estate, approximately $100 million, goes to the Elaine Hartwell Foundation." Sophia exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for days. "See, Dad? I told you!" But something in Henshaw's face stopped me. He was looking at me the way a doctor looks at an X-ray, seeing something the patient can't. "Is there more?" I asked. "Not in the will itself," he said carefully. "But there are. Documents I'm required to share with you. Give me a week." News travels fast in a town of 8,000. By Monday, people knew Elaine had left everything to charity. By Wednesday, they knew I'd gotten nothing. The story wrote itself. The selfless philanthropist and the bitter ex-husband. Friends stopped calling. My neighbor, Karen, who'd brought me casseroles after the divorce, crossed the street when she saw me getting the mail. At the grocery store, the cashier who usually asked about my lawn looked past me like I was furniture. Sophia started echoing the town's verdict. Over coffee at a diner that smelled like burnt oil and resentment, she said, "Dad, Mom saved lives with that foundation. She built schools. You have to respect that." "I do respect it," I said, "but I also spent 30 years married to her. I helped raise you. Doesn't that count for something?" She stirred sugar into her coffee with too much focus. "Some things are bigger than us." I watched her face, my face really, the same narrow chin and deep-set eyes, and realized she wasn't arguing with me. She was trying to convince herself. My neighbor Bill, a retired postal worker with a limp and a memory for gossip, caught me outside one morning. "Heard something strange," he said, leaning on my fence post like he was settling in for a long story. "Elaine changed her will 3 weeks before she died. The old one had provisions for you. This new one," he shrugged, "wiped you clean." I felt something cold move through my chest. "How do you know that?" "My nephew works at the county recorder's office. Saw the filing dates." He tapped the side of his nose. "Just saying, that's fast work for a woman who planned everything 10 years in advance." I went inside and pulled out the divorce papers, the ones I'd kept in a manila folder at the back of my desk drawer. There, in paragraph 14, was language about mutually agreed estate provisions and continued beneficiary status for shared assets. I called Henshaw. He answered on the fourth ring. "Robert, did Elaine's old will include me?" Silence. Then, I can't discuss that, but come see me Thursday, 2 o'clock, alone. The first ally appears Thursday at 2 o'clock. Henshaw's office smelled like old leather and secrets. He closed the door and handed me a photocopy of a document. This, he said quietly, dated 2 weeks before she died. Filed separately. I only found it yesterday because it was misfiled in probate records. I read the first line 3 times before it made sense. In the event that the primary beneficiary fails to uphold fiduciary obligations, all assets shall revert to Robert James Hartwell, contingent beneficiary. What does that mean? I asked, my voice sounding far away. It means Elaine left you a failsafe. If the foundation mismanages the funds or acts in bad faith, you inherit everything. He leaned back in his chair. The question is whether they've mismanaged it. And if they have, his eyes were steady, then you have a case. But you'll need proof, and proof in a $100 million estate is expensive to find. I drove home in a daze. The codicil sat on the passenger seat like a live grenade. My daughter thought I was a bitter man chasing money. The town thought I was grasping at straws. But Elaine, complicated, precise. Elaine had left me a key to a door I hadn't known existed. I needed help, and I needed someone who didn't read the local gossip column. I called Tom Raines, my old supervisor from 40 years ago when I'd worked in municipal planning. Tom had retired to a lakeside cabin 2 hours north, but he still kept his landline and still answered on the second ring. Bob Hartwell, he said, his voice warm and gravelly. Heard about Elaine. I'm sorry. Tom, I need advice. I told him everything. The will, the codicil, the whispers, the daughter who wouldn't look me in the eye. Tom listened the way he'd always listened, without interrupting, breathing steadily on the other end like a man who'd learned patience from bad weather. When I finished, he said, You deserve the truth. I know a forensic accountant in the city. Good man, discreet. You want me to make a call? I don't have money for accountants, Tom. You let me worry about that. I'll call in an old favor. Just promise me something. If you find dirt, you dig all the way down. None of this halfway business. I promised. Tom's accountant was named Marcus Webb, a thin man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and the careful voice of someone who'd seen too many ledgers hide too many lies. We met at a coffee shop in the city, far enough from my town that no one would recognize me. Marcus spread the foundation's public tax filings across the table, 990 forms, annual reports, donor statements. He ran his finger down columns of numbers while I sipped bitter coffee and tried to look like I understood. Here, he said, tapping a line item labeled Administrative Consulting Fees, 2 million. Is that a lot? For a foundation this size, it's high. Not illegal, but high. He circled another entry. And this? Program support disbursements. It's vague. Could be anything. Could be legitimate. Could be a shell game. What do we do? Marcus looked at me over his glasses. We request a full accounting. As a contingent beneficiary, you have standing. They'll resist, but if they resist too hard, that tells us something too. I told Sophia about the codicil. I shouldn't have, not yet, but I needed her to see that I wasn't inventing grievances out of bitterness. We sat in her apartment, a tidy one-bedroom with framed motivational quotes on the walls. She read the document twice, her lips moving slightly, her hands trembling. This doesn't mean anything, she said finally, but her voice had lost its certainty. Mom wouldn't have left the foundation to crooks. I'm not saying she did. I'm saying I want to know. Dad? She set the paper down like it burned her fingers. If you do this, if you go after them, people will think you're greedy. I'll think you're greedy. I'll think you're greedy. And if I don't, I said quietly, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if your mother tried to tell me something and I didn't listen. She looked away. I left. Marcus filed a formal request for an accounting with the foundation's board. The response came 10 days later on letterhead so thick it felt like armor. Dear Mr. Hartwell, the Elaine Hartwell Foundation is committed to transparency within the bounds of donor privacy and fiduciary responsibility. At this time, we are unable to provide the level of detail requested. He'd been a business partner of hers in the early days, a smooth-talking financier with a reputation for aggressive tax strategies. Marcus read the letter and smiled grimly. That's a no, a very expensive no. What's next? We go legal, we file a motion to compel, and we start looking at where the money actually went. Marcus worked fast. Marcus worked fast. Within 2 weeks, he'd traced a series of transactions through public records and cross-referenced them with corporate filings. He called me late one night, his voice tight with the kind of excitement accountants get when numbers stop adding up. Bob, I found something. The foundation made payments to a company called Hartwell Legacy Consulting. Sounds legit, right? Except it's a shell company, registered in Delaware, owned by a holding company, which is owned by another holding company. And at the end of that chain, who? Wallace Kerr, personally. I felt my pulse in my throat. How much? So far, $8 million, spread over 3 years, labeled as consulting fees. $8 million, enough to fund a dozen clinics, enough to send 100 kids to college, enough to make a man disappear into a life of comfort while the foundation's public face stayed shiny and clean. We need a lawyer, I said. We need a good one. Her name was Diane Moss, a litigator in her 40s with a reputation for taking on nonprofits that played fast and loose with donor intent. She met us in her office, a cluttered room with case files stacked like towers and a view of a parking lot. Marcus showed her the money trail. She studied it in silence, occasionally making notes in handwriting so small I couldn't read it. Finally, she looked up. This is actionable. It's also going to get ugly. They'll fight. They'll leak to the press. They'll paint you as a vindictive ex-husband. Can you handle that? I thought of Sophia's face, of the town's sideways glances, of the casseroles that had stopped coming. I can handle it, I said. Good. Because we're going to war. Diane filed a motion to compel a full forensic audit of the foundation. The local newspaper picked up the story within 48 hours. Ex-husband challenges Hartwell Foundation over estate. The comments section was brutal. People called me a vulture, a leech, a man who couldn't let a good woman rest in peace. Someone posted my address. My mailbox received 3 anonymous letters in 1 week, each one telling me to back off in language that ranged from polite to threatening. Sophia stopped answering my calls. The foundation hired a PR firm. Suddenly, every local news outlet was running stories about the clinics, the scholarships, the children whose lives had been saved by Elaine's generosity. Wallace Kerr appeared on the evening news, his silver hair perfect under studio lights, his voice measured and mournful. Robert Hartwell is pursuing a frivolous claim, he said, looking straight into the camera. Elaine wanted her legacy to help people. We intend to honor that wish. I watched from my living room and felt the weight of the world pressing down. But Marcus had the receipts, and Diane knew how to fight. We deposed the foundation's CFO, a nervous woman named Patricia Ewan, who'd been with the organization for 5 years. She sat across from us in a conference room that smelled like recycled air and fear, her hands folded on the table. Diane started gently. Ms. Ewan, can you explain the nature of the payments to Hartwell Legacy Consulting? Patricia glanced at her lawyer, who nodded. They provided strategic guidance, she said, on donor relations and program development. Did you ever meet anyone from that company? A pause. No. Everything was handled through Mr. Kerr. And these payments, $8 million over 3 years, did they come with deliverables, reports, documentation of services rendered? Patricia's hands tightened. I would have to check the files. Please do. Diane slid a document across the table. Because according to our records, there are no files, no contracts, no work product, just wire transfers to a shell company owned by your board chair. Patricia's face went pale. I didn't know. Her lawyer called for a break. But the crack had appeared. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived at Diane's office. No return address. Inside were photocopies of internal emails and meeting minutes, all marked confidential. One email, from Wallace Kerr to Patricia Ewan, was dated 18 months earlier. Consulting fees. Mark as program support to avoid scrutiny. Board doesn't need details. E is getting sicker and won't ask questions. Move forward. Another, from a board member named Gerald Stannis. Wallace, this is getting out of hand. We're supposed to be helping people, not padding your retirement fund. I want out. Kerr's response: You're out when I say you're out. Remember who got you that lake house, Gerald. Diane read them aloud in her office while Marcus and I sat in stunned silence. The words weren't just evidence, they were a confession written in corporate email. Who sent these? I asked. Someone with a conscience, Diane said. And access. My guess? Patricia Ewan. We filed an amended complaint that afternoon. Sophia showed up at my house on a Saturday morning. I was in the garage, trying to fix the lawnmower, when I heard her car in the driveway. She walked in without knocking, her eyes red-rimmed. I read the emails, she said. They're on the news. Someone leaked them. I wiped grease from my hands. I didn't leak them. I know. She sat on my workbench, small and defeated. Dad, I'm sorry. I thought you were being selfish. I thought Mom wouldn't make mistakes like that. Her voice broke. I thought if I defended her hard enough, it would all be true. I set down the wrench and stood in front of my daughter, this fierce woman I'd watched grow up into someone who believed in absolutes. She did make mistakes, I said gently. She trusted the wrong person. That doesn't erase the good she did, but it doesn't mean we ignore the bad either. Sophia nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. What happens now? Now we finish it. The leaked emails forced Wallace Kerr to make a statement. He appeared at a hastily called press conference, his usual polish cracked around the edges. These communications have been taken out of context, he said. The Foundation's finances are sound. Any suggestions otherwise are part of a coordinated smear campaign by a disgruntled ex-spouse. But 3 board members resigned that week. Gerald Stannis went public, telling a reporter that he'd raised concerns about financial irregularities for months and been shut down. Donors began pulling pledges. The Foundation's annual gala was canceled. The court ordered a full forensic audit. Marcus was appointed as an independent examiner with subpoena power. Marcus worked for 6 weeks, going through 7 years of financial records with a team of accountants who lived on coffee and spite. His final report was 143 pages long. The summary was devastating. 3 million diverted to shell companies controlled by Wallace Kerr II. 1 million in program expenses that were actually personal costs. Kerr's country club memberships, his daughter's college tuition, vacations billed as donor cultivation trips. 4 million in kickbacks to vendors who overcharged the foundation and split the difference with Kerr. Out of Elaine's $100 million estate, only $63 million had actually gone to programs. The rest had been skimmed, diverted, or buried in accounting tricks. The report landed like a bomb. The state attorney general opened a criminal investigation. Federal prosecutors started asking questions about wire fraud. The court ordered a settlement conference. We sat in a sterile conference room, me, Diane, Marcus, Wallace Kerr, his lawyers, and a mediator who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Kerr had aged 10 years in 10 weeks. His silver hair looked dull. His suit, though expensive, hung loose on shoulders that had learned how to slump. The mediator started with pleasantries. Diane cut her off. Mr. Kerr stole $37 million from a charitable foundation. He used a dead woman's generosity as a personal ATM. We have emails, wire transfers, and a forensic audit that reads like a criminal indictment. So let's skip the theater and talk about what happens next. Kerr's lead attorney, a man with jowls and a watch that cost more than my car, cleared his throat. My client maintains that all payments were legitimate compensation. Then let's go to trial, Diane said. Let's put him on the stand and ask him under oath what strategic consulting he provided that was worth $8 million. Let's ask him to produce 1 memo, 1 report, 1 shred of work product. Let's ask him. Enough. Kerr's voice was quiet, ragged. He waved his lawyer silent. I'll make restitution. Full restitution. The funds go back to the foundation. I resign. Criminal charges get dropped. Not good enough, I said, speaking for the first time. All eyes turned to me. You don't get to buy your way out and walk away clean. You'll make restitution, yes. You'll resign, yes. But the foundation needs oversight, real oversight. Independent trustees. public accountability, and you'll plead to at least one felony charge. No suspended sentence, no country club prison. Kerr stared at me across the table. This man who'd stolen from a woman he'd claimed to admire, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, not remorse, but resignation. Fine, he whispered. 2 months later, we stood in a courtroom while Judge Catherine Brennan reviewed the settlement and the audit findings. She was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and a reputation for despising white-collar criminals. She read from her decision, "The evidence demonstrates a profound breach of fiduciary duty." Mr. Kerr systematically looted a charitable foundation for personal gain while exploiting the trust of a dying woman. His conduct is reprehensible. She sentenced him to 36 months in federal prison, followed by supervised release and full restitution. Then she turned to me. "Mr. Hartwell, the codicil to your ex-wife's will explicitly states that upon failure of the primary beneficiary to uphold fiduciary obligations, all assets revert to you as contingent beneficiary. The foundation, as currently constituted, has failed catastrophically. Therefore, I am placing the Foundation's remaining assets, approximately $68 million after restitution and legal fees, under your control as sole heir and trustee." The courtroom went silent. Sophia, sitting beside me, grabbed my hand. "You inherit it all," the judge said. "What you do with it is now your responsibility." I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Sophia had left the envelope all those months ago, and stared at legal documents that said I controlled $68 million. The number was absurd. I'd spent my life counting pennies, clipping coupons, buying the generic brand because it was 30 cents cheaper. Now I had enough money to never work again, to buy houses, cars, whatever foolish thing people with too much money buy. But Elaine's face kept appearing in my mind. Not the woman she'd become, polished, distant, untouchable, but the girl I'd married at 24, who'd wanted to make the world gentler. "What do you want me to do with this?" I asked the empty kitchen. The house didn't answer, but I already knew. I hired new trustees, a retired nonprofit director, a healthcare administrator with 30 years of experience, and Sophia, who quit her hospital job to run day-to-day operations. We brought in independent auditors and implemented financial controls that would make embezzlement nearly impossible. We reopened the clinics that had shuttered when donations dried up. We funded the scholarships that had been suspended. We hired program officers who actually visited sites and verified that money reached the people it was meant to help. And we renamed it. Not after Elaine, not after me, just the Legacy Foundation, for what we hoped it would become. Forgiveness in a small town doesn't come with apologies. It comes with invitations. Karen, my neighbor, brought over a casserole on a Tuesday evening. She didn't mention the months of silence. She just said, "Tuna noodle, extra cheese, the way you like it." At the grocery store, the cashier asked about my lawn again. Bill from next door brought over a six-pack and sat on my porch. "Knew you weren't crazy," he said, popping open a beer. "Knew something wasn't right. You didn't know any such thing." He grinned. "Maybe not, but I'm glad you fought anyway." On a gray afternoon in November, I drove to a clinic, the foundation funded in a neighborhood where healthcare had been scarce. I didn't announce myself. I just walked in and sat in the waiting room. A mother held a feverish child. An elderly man filled out paperwork with shaking hands. A nurse called names and led people back to exam rooms, where doctors saw them without asking first if they could pay. I signed the visitor log, just my name, no title, and left a $100 bill in the donation box by the door. It felt like a promise kept to a woman I'd once loved, who'd once loved me, before money and distance and the inevitable erosions of time had pulled us apart. Sophia and I met for coffee on Sundays now. It had become our ritual, the thing that stitched us back together one conversation at a time. "Do you ever think about what Mom would say?" she asked one morning, stirring sugar into her cup. "About all this? About you running her foundation?" I considered the question. I think she'd be furious I found out, and relieved I fixed it. "Do you forgive her? For trusting Kerr? For almost leaving you with nothing?" I watched steam rise from my coffee. She left me a codicil, a failsafe. a failsafe. She knew something was wrong, even if she didn't know how wrong. She tried to protect what mattered, so, yeah, I forgive her. Sophia's eyes shone. I'm glad you fought, Dad. I'm glad you didn't let them win. We didn't let them win, I corrected. You came back. That mattered more than any audit. We publish every transaction online. We invite audits. We answer questions. I still live in the same house with the vinyl siding that needs replacing. I still drive the same car, though I finally fixed the taillight. My pension still covers the mortgage. The foundation pays me nothing. I don't need it, and it wouldn't feel right. Sophia runs the organization with a fierce competence that reminds me of her mother. She calls me most evenings to talk through decisions. We argue sometimes. We agree more often. We're building something that might outlast both of us. I learned something in those months of fighting. Legacy isn't what you leave in a will. It's what survives the people who try to destroy it. Elaine wanted to help people. Wallace Kerr wanted to help himself. The difference between those two wants is the difference between a foundation that saves lives and one that lines pockets. Money is just numbers until you decide what they mean. I decided they meant keeping a promise to a woman I'd loved, protecting a daughter I'd almost lost, and building something that might make the world a fraction gentler. That's enough.